Hey, indie filmmakers, I'm Griffin Hammond.
I'm Nick Bodmer, and on this week's episode, we go step by step through the documentary filmmaking process.
Plus, your questions about interviewing subjects, focal lengths for crop sensors, and how to trick your Atomos recorder. Today, we have a bunch of questions about a similar topic, so I thought we could devote an episode to this.
A whole episode to documentary filmmaking. Do we know anyone that's a documentary filmmaker, Griffin?
That is how I make my money. That is my full-time job. So yeah, a lot of the questions we have today are just about some of the projects I've done and kind of the workflow, how you shoot documentary.
Beginning to end.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we can cover all of it in one episode, but these are pretty good questions.
It's going to be like an 8-hour episode. It's going to be really good, really deep.
Well, that's what's funny. I do have a 7-hour class on the topic, so I suppose... if you really did want to go from beginning to end, it takes about 7 hours.
There you go. So we're not going to get quite that deep today, but we've got a lot of good questions. Should we jump in?
Yeah, let's do it. So the first question we have is an email that I got from Bob, and he says he's really interested in the process for documentaries. What's the workflow like from concept to delivery? Okay, so he does want the full 7 hours.
So see Griffin Hammond's class on creativelive.com, Bob. No. Let's go high level. Let's talk through the steps.
So, like, I'm in the middle of several shoots right now. I actually have 3 different clients at the moment where I'm shooting documentary stuff for all of them. And I guess the common thread is I need people. Like, that's the big thing. I need interview audio. That's really the reason I shoot interviews. It's mostly so I have audio that I can build a story out of.
Okay.
So that's always what I'm, like, planning first. So, for example, I have a project right now that it'll require several point of views, and so I know there's probably going to be 4 interviews that I need to shoot. So I actually just shot one in New York this week and sat down with this person took about 25 minutes to get all my questions answered. Even though this is only going to be a 2-minute or 3-minute documentary piece, I know that I have to ask a lot of questions so that I understand their story well enough that I can cut it way down and it'll be appropriate. But I shot that interview, and I shot it with 2 different camera angles, thinking maybe I'll need coverage to cut it up. But then I know I don't want to linger on these interview shots very long. So I also tried to shoot as much B-roll as I could during the process. So I got some insert shots during the interview, things I could cut to, like hands. He talked about a tattoo he had. He talked about a space that he was in, and he showed me like what the space, how big it was. But then I also just got this guy walking around the city so I could get shots of him in his environment.
So you said something interesting there. You said you wanted multiple point of views, which is a little different than just, trying to get somebody's story. Can you talk a little bit about that? Are you trying to get different angles on the same idea so you can craft a narrative?
I mean, anything I shoot, even if it is a one-person documentary, I'm always looking for variety, whether it's visual variety. I mean, sometimes I will interview someone multiple times in different locations just so it feels like I spent a lot of time with them. I mean, sometimes I do this in one afternoon. But I want it to feel like we're telling the whole story. So if you have the opportunity to talk to multiple people, I want to get different voices and different faces, and I can even just switch up the direction of the interviews. I'm shooting one where they're looking to the left, one where they're looking to the right. I think it's just a simple way to make the edit easier. It's going to be more compelling to watch a variety of voices, I think.
Okay, very good.
And from like a journalistic perspective, it feels more responsible. If you're telling a story, especially if it's a story that affects a lot of people, hopefully you want to have a lot of people. If we told the Sriracha documentary and it was only David Tran telling his story, that could be interesting. But if we're not hearing what other people think about him, what people think about his product...
It adds more validity and truth to the story.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I imagine we could keep talking forever about Bob's question, but I think some of the other questions that we got, we'll continue to answer Bob's question.
Okay.
Do you want to read this question we got from Daniel?
Sure, we
He's
got an email from
Austria.
Daniel from Austria. I saw on Panasonic's YouTube channel that you shot some photographer portraits. Can you talk about Gruno's shoot? He says he's interested in everything, but especially how much time did you have to shoot and edit? How did you get such good quotes from him? Did you script it? And how did you ask your questions? Any secrets?
So Ben Gruno's video, that's the one where I went to Switzerland. It was one of 4 videos I shot for Panasonic about photographers who use the Lumix GH5. That one was a lot of fun just because the environment was amazing and I learned a lot from him. He's an interesting landscape photographer. So let's see, time to shoot. I actually probably had more time than I needed with Ben. And that's actually what I'm finding on a lot of my projects recently is that I'll budget 2 days with someone and then realize, oh, I might be able to shoot this whole thing in 3 hours. But I think with Ben, we were in Switzerland together for 3 days. And I think ultimately the best stuff I got probably happened in 2 different afternoons. So it gave me a chance to kind of try some stuff over and over until I felt like, oh, this is the part of the mountain where the stuff I was shooting. I already shot the stuff before, but it looks really great now with this light. And, maybe it takes time to get your subject used to you. So, I mean, Ben and I were literally hiking together through the mountains for days. And so we got to know each other well, and that was good for the project.
Well, I thought it was interesting, you have that video where you show how you were kind of in the frame during that interview and you cut yourself out. But I think getting yourself close to him, getting him talking to you and not talking to the camera probably helped open him up too, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I want to control his eye line, which is part of the reason I'm in the shot, because I want him to almost be looking at the camera. I don't want him looking way off camera. But yeah, I could have done that and stood way behind the camera. Part of that would have been that I couldn't hold the microphone in the right place. But also, if I was way behind the camera, he just wouldn't feel very connected to me.
Exactly. You were right there. He was basically just having a conversation with you, which I think is why it feels so natural.
Although in some environments, this was actually, when I interviewed him on the top of this mountain, it was actually a perfect place to interview him because for some reason we weren't getting much wind up there and it was just perfectly quiet. Like there's no city around us. There's no noise anywhere. So that was a rare situation during an interview where I wasn't too concerned about the signal to noise ratio, that I knew that he would sound pretty good on the microphone. But I could see situations where if I had been able to place the microphone close to him, lock it down on a chair or something and walk away, there have been interviews where I do want to get myself a little bit farther away from the subject because most subjects who aren't comfortable yet being interviewed, they have a tendency to be pretty quiet.
Oh, so by backing up, they're going to naturally increase their volume to talk to you?
Because if they know I'm across the room, they have to speak up to talk to me. So sometimes I tell people, like, imagine I'm farther away. Like, I need you to speak like you're trying to reach me. Because I think sometimes people are just
it's interesting how you frame that as how they are communicating with you, not, oh, my microphone needs you to be louder because it's loud out here. And that's going to get in their head, and it's all kinds of stuff they're not used to. But if you just tell them, hey, imagine I'm far away and you need to be loud so I can hear you, that's something that they can connect with right away.
Yeah. And if people are curious about that, I usually just tell them that we all sound more interesting, we sound more confident, we sound more fun. Like, especially I think anytime I'm trying to, like, do a tutorial video and appear happy, you just seem happier when you're louder.
You're saying I need to talk louder too.
So, I mean, it's always easier to get someone to speak up more than to like get the microphone closer. But even as close as you can get a microphone, if they're whispering, it's still going to sound like they're not very engaged.
So did you script any of his answers, or were those all totally off the cuff?
I like to keep it completely real. I mean, I guess in the editing, I'll kind of construct things if I feel like I'm being true to what they meant to say. You know, they said something great, but it took 2 minutes to say it. I'll cut it down to 20 seconds and try to maintain the truth of what they meant. But usually in the moment, I don't feel like I need to tell them what to say. Sometimes I'll just rephrase questions if they're not quite answering fully, but I don't ever like to say, here's what you need to say to me, because I know that just won't sound realistic. And I guess I kind of approach it from a journalistic point of view. Even when I'm making a corporate video, I still find that the truthful answers are the better ones, rather than feeding them lines. So his final question was about how I ask questions. I mean, the simple thing that people always tell you is to not ask yes or no questions, which I still do sometimes. And better interview subjects will know that even if you're asking them a yes/no question, they should speak on that for a little bit. I think my general strategy in an interview is just knowing that a lot of times at the beginning of an interview, the answers I'm going to get won't be very comfortable yet. They may not be good at answering at the beginning.
Yep.
So I usually ask some throwaway questions.
Just to get them talking and get them comfortable.
Yeah, like, if I'm interviewing someone about being at a political rally, I'll just say, like, where are you from? How long did it take you to get here? Was it interesting going through Secret Service? And it's like those kind of questions. I may or may not use them, but what I really want to know is, what do you think about this candidate? But I know if I start with, like, tell me about your political opinions, that's just a rough place to start. Yeah, so I just try to get them talking, get them used to me, and I'm not afraid to come back to a question at the end of the interview. I might become a better interviewer over the course of an interview. They may become a better subject, and it's okay to revisit some questions.
Do you reword them, or are you comfortable just asking the same exact question again and just seeing what you get?
I usually do reword it a little bit. And, you have to be willing to ask follow-up questions. So when you ask your perfectly crafted question and they answer it terribly, then you need to try it a different way, approach it from a different angle, and see if it sparks.
Do you use any of these tricks on me here at the podcast? Are you like warming me up before you ask me the tough questions?
No, I don't. I think you're the better interviewer on this podcast. I think sometimes I get lost in my thoughts, and you're the one that knows what follow-up question to ask.
Speaking of follow-up, we've got an email from Mark. Do you want to read it to us, Griffin?
Sure. So Mark wants to know how to handle releases and payments for people that he interviews and features in a documentary. How do I approach this? He points out that his budgets can be very small for indie documentaries, and wondering if you should compensate people that participate in your film.
Like as interview subjects, he's asking?
Yeah.
I guess interesting because I'd never considered that. I never even thought about paying someone who appeared in an interview.
Right, and I've never paid anyone to be in a documentary. I have paid people that have collaborated with me on a documentary. I've paid for music. I've paid for, renting a space. But I've never paid a subject of a documentary.
It almost feels journalistically inappropriate, as if you are compromising their answers if they could somehow receive compensation down the line. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I suppose it's not inherently wrong to pay a subject, especially if you are taking up a lot of their time. But I suppose you do want to try to do it in a way that's avoiding a conflict of interest. You want to make sure that there's not a perception that you are getting the answers you want because you paid them. And I suppose if you're telling like a political film, that's where you really could get into trouble. If you're wading into controversial topics, you don't want to seem like you forced someone to say something controversial by paying them.
I guess, I could see paying someone if, kind of like in a courtroom where an expert witness would come in and they might get paid for their time to just talk about something that they are considered an expert on. Perhaps that's a situation where someone would expect to be compensated to appear. But I think if you're looking for opinion, I don't think there's any expectation that people should be compensated in a documentary.
It depends on if you really are asking a lot of them. But I think that's always kind of the question you're faced with when you're making documentary is you do have to ask of people's time and effort. And I'm always trying to, one, limit. I don't want to impose too much. So I tell them, look, I'll come in and set up for half an hour. The interview will only take 20 minutes. We'll shoot maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes of B-roll afterward, but then I'll get out of your hair. And in every case, when I'm making a documentary piece, usually that subject is an ally of mine because they want their story told, or it's about a subject that they're passionate about. So hopefully you're finding some common ground where this person believes in your project and they want to participate. And yeah, if it's a tough sell, maybe that's where money does have to exchange hands.
Do you ever have experience interviewing someone who is not considered an ally, who might be somewhat confrontational during the interview?
I mean, I've interviewed when I worked for Bloomberg News and interviewed politicians. We were certainly very confrontational. Luckily, the politicians themselves generally feel like they need to go on camera and defend themselves, or at least you have those opportunities to shout questions at them or catch them at a press conference. And I suppose there probably were times when I interviewed people that, I don't know, I think almost everyone we interviewed during the campaign wanted to go on camera to tell their story. And they know it might be difficult to talk to a journalist, but they also feel competent enough that they can get their point of view across.
Have you encountered that at all in any of your non-political work, where, someone has a kind of an adversarial viewpoint to what you might be trying to show?
Not so much. I mean, it's funny because I admire those kind of documentaries I especially love watching political documentaries, but I could never be like a Michael Moore type. I just don't think I could make that kind of film where I'm constantly confronting people over things. That's just not my personality style. So I realize, most of the things I've made are these very like happy films where everyone is excited to be in them.
But that's just your style, right?
Yeah, that's what I tend to make.
How about releases? We didn't touch on that.
Yes, it is good to get releases. I have a standard release that I have people sign when they're in a film. Sometimes I have clients who give me their own releases. Their company might have a release that they want to make sure people sign. And I'm always struck by these things. The releases are always so broad, which scares me a little bit. The release will be like, we have the right to use your face on any advertising forever.
All over the planet. Or the moon. But not Mars.
Luckily, most people are not, they've seen releases like that before and they're not too worried about it. But, and also I usually am able to explain how it will actually be used. But yeah, it's good to have some sort of paper trail. But I always tell people, even if you don't have a release, just having an email that someone said, yeah, I'll be in your film, like, that's still proof. Maybe it's not as airtight as a legal document, but it's evidence that they said yes and they knew what they were getting into. Also, I kind of think, like, even if you just ran up to people on the street, if you have a camera out and someone is standing in front of your camera talking to you for several minutes,
there's an implied consent there.
Yeah, I feel like it'd be hard to make the argument, I didn't know I was being filmed. I didn't want to be in something. Well, I think if you want any more documentary lessons, you're going to have to go to the class.
Not masterclass, Creative Live, right?
Yeah. Or just listen to this podcast every week.
Over and over. Just the whole back catalog on loop.
Yeah. Well, we have even more questions coming up. So in just a moment, we're going to answer questions about focal lengths for crop sensors and a trick that I learned with my Atomos recorder.
Hey Indie Filmmakers is brought to you by Tongle, the creative network where anyone anywhere has the opportunity to make content for brands and get paid.
So we're getting really close to the end of the year. There are still 11 days left to submit to this thing called the YouTube Pilot Portal on Tongle. Tongle has a bunch of projects, but one of the ones that they are doing to benefit their own YouTube channel is they are looking for you to pitch your ideas for content that would appeal to filmmakers, like a TV show for filmmakers. So you can pitch that idea on Tongle right now, and if they like that idea, they can pay you to make a series that'll air on the Tongle YouTube channel.
Get all the details by visiting tongle.com/projects. That's TONGAL.com/projects. Thank you, Tongle.
All right, so we have a few more questions today. One of them is a YouTube comment from Kisi3L. He writes, "Man, I love listening to these podcasts while I'm editing. I was wondering, have you ever said no to a client because you were not interested in a particular project? If so, how do you go about turning down these projects?"
So, one, I want to know, how do you listen to a podcast while you're editing?
You know, a lot of people say that. I think that's a very common use case for this podcast, is people listen to it while editing. I agree. I can't do that. The way that my brain works, when I'm editing, I have to be totally
Maybe
invested.
if you're doing some like really large edits where it's just like a lot of camera, like if I could see editing like a wedding ceremony where I'm just cutting cameras and things like that, where I don't really care about the audio for the moment, I guess I could see doing that. But I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and a lot of editing is just playing it and making sure there's no mistakes visually. Yeah. So you may just be going through a really long video. I know our friend Adam, he likes to watch movies while he edits, and I never understood that.
I wish. I mean, also, I guess I used to edit on the train, so I would have a lot of distractions, but I have headphones in, and I try and ignore people. But yeah. I can't imagine trying to focus on both.
I can barely read and listen to music at the same time. Like, I need to focus totally on one or the other.
That. Yeah, I don't want music while I'm reading, for sure. Maybe some nice classical in the background. I don't know. Anyway, have you ever said no to a client? I'm going to guess the answer is yes. I have been saying no to clients a lot lately since I'm basically not doing weddings anymore, but people still ask me.
Yeah. So how do you turn down your projects?
Well, I thank people for their interest, because it is, I remember how hard it was to get clients, and now I feel it's like, oh wow, now I just saying no because I don't have the time for it anymore. But I thank them for their interest. I let them know that I'm not taking on new clients at this time, and then I like to point them to someone else, and get a referral in there for somebody who I think has done good work and has helped me in the past. So that's kind of the way I take it. I say, hey, it's not you, it's me, and here's somewhere else you can go for your project.
Yeah, when I turn people down, I usually try to send them to someone else that I know locally, because that always seems to be the follow-up question when I say no, is like, oh, well, do you know anyone?
Yep.
So I try to at least be nice and do that. But every project you can turn down because of your calendar. I mean, I'm always turning down things because they just don't fit into my schedule. And then I can also just use that as an excuse to turn down projects that I really am not interested in. There may be projects that are a perfect use of my talent, but I just think like, that's not something I want to do. And you can always say, I'm not available.
Makes it.
I mean, I don't need to go into the details of why I don't want to work on a project. But
Let's
usually
talk
for me,
about your failures as a client and why I don't want to work with you.
But also, I turn down projects that I think are not appropriate for my cost. Like, sometimes people will ask me if I can like film a recital, and they don't need any editing. They just want a 2-hour uncut single camera shot. And I just think like, you don't want to pay me $200 an hour to just put a camera on a tripod and click record. Like, there are other people that can do that. And that's also just feel like I would kind of feel wasted. Like, I would feel weird showing up to that, hitting record, and then walking away and being like, that's not what I do, though. I'm not really a
You need a business manager, my friend. That's free money.
But it's also like not something I need.
Yeah,
I guess I want
the
pay that goes along with the editing time, and I want something that I can show off and be proud of. So yeah, there are some projects I just know aren't the right fit for me.
Next week on Hey, Filmmakers, we'll be reviewing Griffin's recital video. Griffin, I like how you didn't move the camera at all or make any cuts. I thought that was a bold choice.
And that's not to say that I haven't done those kinds of videos. I mean, you should take those kinds of videos when you need them. But at a certain point, if you don't need that kind of work anymore, then you don't have to take it.
All right, we have an email from Matthew. I've been listening to the podcast since the beginning. My wife and I just uploaded our first short doc. What would you guys have some suggestions on how to get people excited about our short?
It's another good documentary question today. That's always a hard question for any film is how do you get people interested in it? But at least I feel like documentary at least has the benefit of it's a true story and there's already people involved in the story. Like the people that you are interviewing are probably excited that this thing exists. Mm-hmm. Going back to like how you convince them to be part of it in the first place without necessarily paying them. All the people in your film are the people that want their friends to see this. I mean, I even noticed this with Sriracha. In fact, it's the reason the film got popular at all was the first person I interviewed was Randy Clemens, and he was excited to be in the film, and he posted it on Facebook, and then all of his reporter friends started talking about it, and soon it was in the Huffington Post and Los Angeles Times and all that.
So,
but it's like
what I'm hearing you say is look for an advocate for the content of your film, and that's probably somebody you talked to during its creation, and leverage their network to help grow the audience.
Right. Like I noticed that Matthew's film is about an art community. It's a film about creating art. In fact, it's a very specific kind of art. It's like painting rocks. I can't remember what city this was in, but there's a lot of people in his film. All of those people are part of this community that are excited about what they're doing. You would hope that you could mobilize that group and say, hey, look, we made a film about you. You need to share this broadly. And I mean, those are the people that want to show up to a screening, and I think you can kind of build from there.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you make people watch a fiction film.
I watched a fiction film recently. You may have heard of it. It's called Star Wars.
Oh. Well, we'll save your thoughts for the end because someone was asking about that.
All right. We won't talk about that yet. Don't worry.
Our next two comments, these are pretty quick. They're just in response to a question that we got last week. We had a question from Sierra. She was wondering what focal lengths to shoot with on a Canon camera, a Canon 60D in New York. And I mentioned that you pretty much double the focal length to go from Panasonic Micro Four Thirds to a full frame Canon. So like my 12 millimeter lens that I'm shooting with right now, that'd be 24 millimeters on a Canon full frame. But a couple people pointed out, we kind of forgot one aspect of this. We got a YouTube comment from Aaron Walterscheid who pointed out that the 60D is a 1.6 crop. So even though it uses the lenses that go on a full frame Canon, it is tighter. Mm-hmm. So he points out that actually a 50 millimeter on a Canon would be more like a 40 millimeter, a 50 millimeter on a Canon crop, like a 1.6 crop, like the 60D, would be more like a 40 millimeter on the GH5. I'm wondering if I even said that right. Yeah. So he suggests that if you want a 50 millimeter equivalent on a 60D, you would want something like a 32 millimeter. And it looks like John, who sent me an email, also had similar advice, saying that he seems to think that a really good walking around lens would be a 35 millimeter prime on a 60D.
Beautiful.
Oh, he also sent us a picture. He really likes the Lumix 25 millimeter f1.7 on his G85.
Yep.
In fact, you have that lens, don't you? Or you have the 20?
I don't think I have. Which lens did you say? The 20 what?
This is a 25 f1.7. Yeah, you don't have that one. No. You have the pancake lens, the 20 millimeter.
20 millimeter f1. It might be an f1.7, but it's that pancake.
Yeah, the 25 millimeter is a little bit bigger. But he sent me a photo of him and his wife as they were hiking through the Andes in Peru with this camera.
Nice. All right, we've got an email from Al from Australia. Doing some roller hockey streaming content and wanted to use my Atomos Ninja Blade as a media player for the adverts I made in Final Cut. Is there a reason why the Ninja won't play the media I import onto the SSD? I matched the codec and all the stuff on a file that I recorded originally on the Ninja directly. Any thoughts, mate? He searched high and low for an answer.
So, do you know that I actually have an Atomos now?
I did not.
I just met with Atomos last week, and I've started using a Ninja Inferno.
Okay.
Which is very similar to the Ninja Blade that Al was talking about. I think the Ninja Inferno can handle 4K 60, and the Ninja Blade can handle 4K 30.
All right, so let's stop. Why would you want to use an external recorder? How does that help your workflow?
Well, generally, I've felt like I haven't needed one because I like to be very lightweight, and I like that the GH5 can do a lot of this stuff internally now. But one reason you might want it is that a monitor, not only are you able to record like ProRes and DNX HD, you can record these higher quality codecs, easier to edit codecs. You could also have all these features on the monitor like false color and focus peaking and zooming in to check focus. And I already have focus peaking on the camera, but like also just seeing it on a bigger screen. So I did find myself using it on a documentary project this week just for an interview. I figured for an interview, I don't mind having extra weight on the camera.
So the recorder has a screen on it?
Yes. Yeah, so it's really just it's a monitor that also takes an SSD, a hard drive can plug into the back.
That's cool.
And it's battery powered.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't realize they were kind of combos there.
Yeah. That's what Atomos does. And Atomos is actually an Australian company, so Al's even closer to them than I am. But I sent his question directly to one of my friends over at Atomos because I was curious as well. And they told me that it should work. You just need to put one of the two codecs that the Atomos writes. So if you encode your video as a ProRes video or a DNX video, it needs to be a ProRes MOV, or I imagine it needs to be a DNX MXF file. If you just throw that back on the hard drive, it should play. And I even tried it myself. I just took something I edited in Final Cut, I exported it as a ProRes file. It's a 4K 24p video. I didn't even have to give it a special name or anything. I just threw it on the hard drive and it works.
Cool. So maybe just there's probably a small problem in the way he exported it and just needs to triple check that.
Yeah, I know that Final Cut's native rendering format is ProRes, and if you just go out, maybe don't even use one of the export presets, just use the master file export from Final Cut, and it should export as ProRes. I mean, you can even check it when you go to export master file. You can check the settings and make sure it's doing ProRes 422, and if you do that, it should work. I even found it doesn't even seem to matter if it's like uppercase MOV or lowercase MOV. I think it's actually just running Linux on this little Atomos.
That's kind of cool. How big of a SSD does it have?
I got a 512 gigabyte Samsung 850 Pro. That's what it's called.
I have one of those in my new desktop I built.
Yeah, it was one of the. There's a few hard drives that are recommended for this kind of device. I guess you need something that writes quickly enough and fast, is consistently enough. And I'm glad I was kind of between getting a 256 or 512. I didn't really know which size I would need. And I think the 512 would have given me 80 minutes of recording. I was recording my interview at 4K 30 in ProRes. I think it was also 10-bit color. But I remember doing the interview and it took a little bit longer than I thought it would. Like I thought all I'm going to need is 20 minutes or something. And I think maybe we recorded for 30 or 40. And I just thought like, oh yeah, I would have been hitting up against, we could have run into our limit if I had gotten a 256.
Sorry, I think this is interesting. So I'm going to ask you more questions. Then I'm just trying to understand the workflow. So now you've got all your video. It's already in ProRes. It's not in H.264, which is nice. How do you get it on your computer? Do you have like a dock for the SSD, or does it just plug in over USB 3, or how does that work?
Yeah, so Atomos has a little, I don't know what they call it, but they just have a little USB reader for the hard drive.
And is the hard drive just like a bare 2.5-inch drive that you just pop out and pop into a reader, or is it in like a caddy or something?
It's in a caddy, but the caddy is so low profile, it's practically the same size as the hard drive. The hard drive is maybe 2/3 the height of this caddy, and the caddy really just gives it, you just screw it onto the hard drive. That just really gives it something to snap into the recorder.
That's cool. I like that. So does that speed up
it's
the editing process that you already have the footage in ProRes ready to go?
Yeah, it's easier for the computer to play. It also is a quicker transfer getting it off an SSD than getting it off SD cards.
Sure. Yeah, the SSD is way faster.
But I also recorded to both the SD cards and the hard drive because this was my first time shooting with it, and I just, I didn't know if I could trust it yet.
Seems like a good backup. Yeah, why not record to both?
Yeah. But this was actually my first time shooting an interview in Vlog. I thought, one of the reasons to shoot on a monitor with hard drive onto ProRes is to get the best quality you can, and I might as well get the most dynamic range I can. So let's shoot it in Vlog. You can even load a LUT onto the monitor, so I threw a LUT on there that displayed it so it wasn't flat, so I could kind of tell what I was getting. The thing I noticed shooting Vlog is I have to be careful that it's a lot harder to tell if I'm not white balanced.
Oh, interesting.
It's such a flat image that it's a little bit harder to see if you are exposed properly and if you're white balanced properly. So first of all, I kept the camera in natural while I was exposing and setting up the shot and setting white balance,
and then
I could still see all that stuff very clearly. Yeah, then I switched it to Vlog, and then I'm looking through the monitor, and I can use the monitor's tools like false color to make sure I'm exposed properly. I had my zebra stripe set on the monitor, so I have some other tools available to me, but also the fact that the monitor is showing it not in the flat color profile helps me know that I'm getting a good shot.
That's cool.
But then when I take it on the computer, I have a super flat ProRes version that maybe gives me a little bit more latitude to color grade. And I just discovered something in Final Cut that I didn't know was there. If you bring in a log file into your event viewer, you can select a clip, go to the info tab in the inspector, and you can change how it interprets the video. There's a drop down called log processing. It may only be in the advanced inspector details, but if you go to log processing, you can change it to like Canon log or Sony log or Panasonic vlog, and instead of showing it as a super flat thing in the timeline, it actually looks more normal.
Well, that was a deep dive on the Atomos Ninja. That's cool. He did have one final part of a question. By the way, The Last Jedi, yay or nay?
I say yay.
I also say yay. I also say yay. I enjoyed it.
Amy actually saw it before me, and when she went on the opening night, I saw it the next day. They gave her a little tiny BB-8.
Oh, that's cool. I think I might have
some
a
like
BB-8.
trading cards.
No, I don't. Never mind.
I mean, I don't want to talk about spoilers because I'm sure there's still people who haven't seen it, but how much did you like it? Where would you place it in the hierarchy of Star Wars films?
I really want to see it again before I give it its final opinion, but I liked it a lot. I think I liked it better than Force Awakens.
Me too.
I would put it in my top third of Star Wars films, probably. I really liked it.
I was tempted to say that, I mean, I still love Empire the most. I was tempted to say that I liked The Last Jedi more than Rogue One, but then I went back and I watched Rogue One the other day, and it is just such a solid film. I think the only edge that Last Jedi has is that it has the major characters.
Sure.
And it has all, but they're both such nostalgic films. I think Last Jedi is occasionally a little bit silly, but it's a lot of fun, and it's also really visually interesting. I love these kind of iconic moments that they created.
Yeah, I'm really excited to go see it again. I think I'll have a much clearer picture once I see it a second time, but right now I'd probably rank it third or fourth. I'd probably say Empire, Return.
Yeah, you like Return of the Jedi a lot.
I'm as a kid, I just loved that one, so that one's always up high for me. And then probably this one, maybe A New Hope, but it's still before it. Maybe the entire original trilogy still locks up for me. But yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I'm a little surprised at the reaction online, to be honest.
What, the negative reaction?
Yeah. I think that might be a vocal minority. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's just filmmaking in general. It's like you can't please everyone. It's all an expectations game. Everyone goes into a film thinking they know what it's going to be, and it's definitely not going to be that thing.
Can we talk about one thing though? Not spoilers, don't worry, but I feel like trailers these days are giving away way too much. Like I think for the next Star Wars, I'm going to avoid watching any trailers.
Yeah. Well, you always say that and then you watch them.
Well, I know. Well, I don't think I've said that before, have I?
No, I mean, people generally say, like, I'm going to go into this one fresh. Can't watch any Star Wars trailers. There was just
a few moments that I was like, man, I kind of wish I had not seen that in the trailer. I think it would have been more impactful sitting here. So I'm going to give that a whirl next time, trying to be totally spoiler-free for the next film. We'll see how it goes.
Well, before we go, I have one final question. This is actually a question that I have that I can't find the answer to. I wonder if one of our listeners might know. So I've been using Adobe Lightroom I've used it in the past, but recently I've been using it a lot this year to edit photos. And they upgraded it to, now they have like an Adobe Lightroom Classic, and now they have a new Creative Cloud. And actually, I noticed maybe they always called it this, but it looks like they're calling it Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. Was that always the case?
I think it might have been that way for a while. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think it's technically called Adobe Photoshop Lightroom CC is the new one. And it's kind of a simplified version of Lightroom that maybe focuses a little bit more on the library aspect of organizing your photos. In fact, it even uses like neural networks where, at least I think that's what they're using, where Lightroom in the cloud has learned what a mountain photo looks like.
Oh, yeah.
So if you search mountain in your own library, it tries to pull up all the photos that it thinks are mountains, which is interesting to see what it thinks.
Probably using not like machine learning on the back end.
Right. Yeah, it's not like someone's actually tagging your photos. It's just going, I've seen mountain photos and they look generally like this. So it actually, it picks some things that aren't mountains, but they're close. So I generally like the new software. It seems to do what I need to do, except for my infrared photos. There was kind of a workaround in the old Lightroom where infrared photos are so red, the white balance is so wrong that even the slider for white balance doesn't go far enough to fix it. So what I had to do is I do this thing. I think I used a piece of software called Adobe DNG Editor. Mm-hmm. You essentially bring in one of your really red infrared photos. You can use like an eyedropper tool or something. I can't remember exactly what I did, but you can mess around with some sliders and get it to look normal. And then you save that camera profile, and you could load that camera profile into Lightroom. So for future photos, you could say, treat it like this. And then that would kind of reset all the sliders. So now they're all starting at 0, but the picture looks normal. And now you can actually make your adjustments. Problem is, I don't see how to load those into the new Lightroom. So it seems like some of my infrared photos it's treating correctly because it's like, I don't know, it's treating it like it came out of the camera. But then other photos are just turning pink and red, and I can't seem to change that.
So we're looking for the audience to help us here. Is that what you're telling me? Because I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah. Has anyone else used infrared photos in the new Lightroom, and how are you dealing with that? Because I can't seem to get them to interpret correctly.
And the person who helps you gets a fabulous prize?
My undying love and
appreciation.
Yeah.
The thanks of a grateful documentary filmmaker.
I do like the idea of the new Adobe Lightroom. That the reason I migrated over to it is because it puts all my photos in the cloud, and now Lightroom is accessible from my iPhone. It's accessible on my iPad. I can go to any computer, and I guess it's going to pull them all. At least it's going to pull smart previews down from the cloud, so I can view all my images. I think I can even edit them remotely on my mobile devices or on a different computer, and then
how much
saving that metadata.
How much do you pay a month for that?
Well, it's included in the total Adobe. I think I'm paying $55 a month or $50 a month for Adobe Creative Cloud.
Okay.
For all the apps.
Cool.
And I use enough that it's worth it. Like I use Photoshop regularly. I use Audition. I use Media Encoder. I use After Effects sometimes. I don't use Premiere, but I have access to it.
What about Encore? They still have that in there?
No, they don't. I think Encore is outdated. Although I think there is a way to download it, but there's not like a Creative Cloud version of Encore. They stopped supporting
Nobody's
that.
making
That's
DVDs anymore.
Yeah, that's the DVD Blu-ray software.
Yeah. Well, this was a fun episode. We got into all kinds of good stuff, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Well, next week, you'll have to join us again, as usual, on Wednesdays, because we're talking about audio libraries.
Ooh.
Actually, the one that I prefer most and how I find music.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Do you care if I'm in focus?
I do. Yeah, if you could be in focus, that'd be wonderful.
Just for you, Mr. Hammond. Just for you.